So I'd like
Okay.
to shift into a conversation with you to unpack some of what you just shared, which is a lot. One of the questions I have, so I'm just going to share when you the quantum and the classical, the two modes that you shared with us. What it did is it made me think about the guiding principles of Project Inside Out, and that in a way, those guiding principles and this project is somewhat of an intervention. It's um it's an intervention in what I experience to be a very classical approach within the environment. And I'm not saying this as a diss or a critique, but a classical approach within the environmental and climate movement for a number of decades that is premised on pushing and trying to get people to change. And it's a very aggressive and very it feels like I'm gonna be just really open about it. It feels like it's based on some real mythology about how change, like the nature of reality, how change actually happens in the world, because it's this based on this fantasy that if we tell people enough, if we push enough, if we, kind of activate in certain ways, that somehow magically we are going to connect the dots and transform. And we just know that's not the case. And what was very profound for me in your work, and I'm thinking about how I dived in to your literature over the past few years, and I really honed in on this concept of attunement, because I remember reading in one of your books about you were talking clinically about someone you were working with, and how it was only when there was a sense of attunement between you and this person that the person was able to actually process, integrate trauma, and move into a whole new different way of being in the world. And the light went off for me, and I thought, my God, that is what the climate and environmental community needs to be doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we, then there's the question, well, how do we develop those abilities, those capacities to do that? And also, frankly, the concept of attunement is a little bit awkward to translate. I'm finding it like a lot of people are like, it makes intuitive sense to me, but, what do you really mean? So I know I just shared a bunch of different things, but
Yeah, well, I mean,
reflection.
yeah, thank you. What comes up for me is the idea of and the experience of joining,
Mm-hmm.
and the acronym PART places attunement within that joining experience. So it's presence, and teaching people to access that plane of possibility, that, the hub of the metaphoric wheel, but the plane where you let go as a connector to fixed ideas, even of how the environment should change, and to really join with people. The presence needs to be there. Then the attunement is where you're focusing your attention on the inner subjective experience of another. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's one way of understanding attunement. And it is allowing the R of part, resonance, to happen. Just like, when you tune in with an instrument, they resonate, the strings, with each other. And then the T is trust. So the part I think we need to play, presence, attunement, resonance, trust, places your beautiful notion of attunement, the topic for today, into a context that is really about joining. Because if there is no trust, there's no joining. If there's no resonance, there's no joining. If there's no attunement, there's no joining. If there's no presence, there's no joining. So it's all about joining. And the we notion, which for us is so, vital, is the idea that people are feeling so lonely and so isolated from other people, or people not like them, or from the planet, of, in terms of nature, that that this isolation is the opposite of joining. And so for me, this attunement topic is all about joining. And
Mm-hmm.
attunement is one aspect of part, but they're all equally as important. presence, attunement, resonating, and trust. That as you bring that attunement surrounded by presence, resonance, and trust, then what's happening is the joining as a person no longer is alone. And even people who may be running companies where, the company is destroying, the environment around the factory. When I've done work in other countries and we do the wheel, when people have the direct experience of joining through the hub, when they get into that plane of possibilities, I think what the mechanism is, it's a shift. They go, oh my God, I didn't realize we're really connected to the forest around my factory. And then you go, oh yeah, tell me more about what that feels like, rather than how could you have been doing this last 20 years? Don't you know, blah, blah, blah. So to really be present and attune and resonate, you realize most people, not all, but most people weren't trying to hurt the environment. They were maybe just trying to make some money because they're lost in this materialistic view of what's going to have meaning in their life. So the win-win situation is they realize that material acquisition wasn't getting them happiness, but that's what was driving the factories, polluting. And now they realize true meaning comes from this attunement you're talking about, Renee, and connection and joining. And then they go, wow, I can actually lead a more meaningful life and be helpful to the environment because it's all the same thing. And you go, yeah, welcome to the family. And they go, good, I've always wanted to be in a family. And then that's the transformation I think we can invite.
So what I'm hearing you say very clearly is it's really about the relationality. It's really about connection and feeling and experiencing oneself in relationship. So there's a couple of immediate thoughts I have. One is going back to the waking up moment. I think that for a lot of us around the planet, we are actually waking up to our connection and our relationship. And that's painful. Because I'm out here, I'm in Inverness right now in Marin County. I'm looking at the hummingbirds outside the window and the deer. And I myself, knowing what I know, I can't unknow what I know about where the planet is right now, about climate crisis and the fact that a lot of the life I'm seeing is potentially threatened in some way or another. And so my experience of being attuned can also be fraught and painful. And my sense is that a lot of people are like avoiding that or ambivalent about connecting, like your example with the factory. It's like, I don't know if I want to know, because then I have to feel magnitude of what we've done.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Let me ask you a question, and it's really inspired by a statement from Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy. And in that book, he writes, hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And so then if we build on Brian Stevenson's beautiful statement and say, well, that means hope is the steward of justice. And if we think about justice for the environment, because I feel the same way often as you do, Renee. I look at how beautiful nature is, and then the idea that human beings are destroying it, it fills me with so much pain. But then you can start feeling hopeless. And so what I want to ask you about is then, if the hopelessness arises, then of course it's the enemy of justice. So if we're going to bring justice to earth, we need to actually intentionally tap into what hope is all about. So how does that sit with you? And I can say kind of stuff I'm wrestling with about keeping hope alive in these very challenging times. But how does that sit with you? How's that experience been for you?
Well, I tend to be a bit of I don't talk about hope, and sometimes I'm provocative, and I say I want to blow up the whole idea of the idea of hope versus, because I feel like hope sometimes presents a binary or a dichotomy that doesn't exist, which is despair, hopelessness. I mean, maybe that's a reality, but what I'm trying to move us towards is something more nuanced and complex, which is staying engaged. So how do we stay engaged without there needing to be hope? Because I feel like if I'm basing my level of engagement on a sense of hope that something is gonna change, that feels kind of precarious, because I don't necessarily have hope. you
Oh,
know.
that's so interesting. Yeah, no, I really resonate with that. And some of the things that come up as you're saying that are, and I really appreciate the idea of let's not dichotomize. That's, I think, very, very powerful. And some of the things that come up are these that in discussing these with all sorts of people that I've been working with lately, one of them, Justin Michael Williams, said this beautiful thing on we have a weekly gathering called the PEP meeting, the Personal Exploration of Planetary Possibility. And Justin said this beautiful thing in a group conversation we were having. He said, you know, when you lose hope, it's when the possibilities that you think are able to turn to actualities are less than your pool of
Mhm.
possibilities. In other words, you've lost track of that plane of possibility.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so
Right.
that was a beautiful way of describing it. And then Orlando Villarraga um, said something recently the other day, a poet that we work with, and he said, courage is the bridge between hope and justice. And and it reminded me what Maddie Siegel, my daughter is in environmental science, who she said something really powerful to me because I asked her as she's going through all of her undergraduate, now graduate work in environmental policy and science and stuff. I said, isn't it hard? Don't you doesn't it get to, and she goes, do you mean, am I depressed? Am I despairing? I said, well, yeah, I'm your dad, so I'm concerned about this. What she goes, here's the story. She goes, I am absolutely committed to the intention to learn everything I can to contribute to the well-being of this planet. But I'm not going to get hung up if we don't do it. I'm just going to know I'm committed to the direction, but I don't know exactly what the outcome will be. And it was so powerful to learn from my daughter that notion that I think is shared in wisdom traditions. Later on, I learned that, that we can be committed with hope, if hope is the idea of tapping into possibility, knowing that we don't know the specific actualities that will arise, but we can tap into this thing. And for me, the plane of possibility is so interesting as a, scientific suggestion that three things come from that plane: love, which has embedded in it hope, because it's this vital force of life; interconnection, the realization we're not alone; and this experience of presence, of dropping into this, what I think is this, timeless realm where we realize we are connected not just now to all of nature, but we're connected to all beings that existed before these bodies were born and will exist to our descendants, that will exist in all beings after these bodies are gone, before and after. And that has given me so much peace, Renee. And I got to say, it's actually generated hope. And when I think about Maddie's wise words and Orlando's and Justin's, I think, okay, I'm okay with the word hope because it very much resonates with the word love. And I
Hmm.
think, as a scientist, we're told don't use the word love. And in this community we have, I said, should I stop using the word love? Because it seems like it's unscientific. They go, oh no, you cannot stop using it. And what's amazing in the 10,000 person study is that's what people feel in that hub of the wheel.
Right.
And I think it's the vital force that's going to allow us to have a commitment to that direction, so we have this goal in mind. And this is a way of thinking about the science of hope. We have a goal, we have a sense of agency, like we can do something, social support, and a
Mhm.
project we're involved, right? And that spells the word GASP. That's my acronym for remembering the science of hope, with two S's. So the goal is, how do we actually improve the world? The agency is, like in Project Inside Out, we can be in communities of all sorts. We have a MUI community. It can really be resonating with the Inside Out communities, all these communities. So we have relationships with one another. And then we have a sense of agency. That's the social support. And then the project can be in various sorts. And just look at, Paul's drawdown book, and you'll see all the 100 projects that are actually happening. So
Mhm.
when you start kind of thinking that way, you say, well, the pandemic's been horrible, loss of lives and livelihoods, but it's also a disruption that humanity may have needed, not that we made it happen, but that we may have needed to actually change our identity from a me to a we. And
Mhm.
We don't lose the body, but we find each other and our connections with nature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what it's reminding me of is, and a lot of what my work is about in Project Inside Out is, um, what we're directing attention to is the experience. What Madeline is referencing is the experience of living in alignment, and that itself has a tremendous payoff. That ideally, that's the payoff, as opposed to being reliant and dependent on an outcome. However, I think that people working on these front lines, and I call it existential change management, that's what we're doing. If you think about change management in the org world, we're existential change management people now, leaders. And the tension is that we all want to solve the problems. There's this kind of problem solving mentality, which is something that I do have a little bit of a critique with some of the work, like in Drawdown, that frames things as a solution, because it then presents it, there's a problem solution. And I'm concerned that then we become too focused and fixated on the outcome. But of course, that's why we're all doing it, right? We're all doing this to save and protect living systems. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate. Yeah, we want to avoid being committed to a specific outcome, but from a science point of view, as far as I understand it, I mean, we must
mm-hmm,
reduce emissions. We must decrease the heat that's being generated and trapped, as if we have all these blankets surrounding Earth, so we're too hot.
mm-hmm,
If we're really going to turn this around, there is a science of the direction we need to take. It may not be for a particular company, this will happen in this way,
mm-hmm.
but we do have, if we don't want to use the word solutions, we could just say strategies.
Yeah, I prefer strategy.
Yeah, well, but that's ultimately, we all have to be on the same team. What's our strategy as a
Right.
collective team? I mean, from the psychological point of view, and if there's any contribution that, this work in interpersonal neurobiology, may be able to offer, it's that identity and belonging are constructed by experience. That
Mm-hmm,
in modern culture, we've been constructing a separate self.
mm-hmm.
That this separate self is not only making individuals' lives have a feeling of desperation and meaninglessness, so you see increased depression, anxiety, even suicide, but collectively, it's making us, I think, kill the planet, because we treat Earth like a spherical trash can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in that meeting, I think where you were there at the Garrison Institute, people said, well, give us the keynote address for this, all these
Right.
policymakers on climate change. And I said, well, I'm not in climate change. And they said, yeah, but you got to help us. I said, well, what have you done? They said, we tried to inform people. It didn't work. We tried to scare people. It didn't work. And we have no idea what to do next. So I said, well, I guess if scaring them didn't work and informing them didn't work, maybe transform them. And so that's where this idea of we ultimately came around, that what would happen if, when you raise a young child or an adolescent, or we as adults reconfigure our sense of identity as including Earth as a part of our body, as Sarah so beautifully led us to, as Joanna Macy has taught for decades.
Right.
What if the skin of our, somatic bodies is not the end of our identity? It's just the beginning. And that, in fact, the Earth, and some people say just go for the universe, but that's pretty big. Let's just stay with Earth for now. That the Earth is our body, our collective body. Well, what that means is that you have to drop into some kind of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's one thing to, bathe your body and, put your body in bed for sleep and feed your body. And that's hard enough in life. Now
Right.
you have your whole body is the Earth. Oh my God. So you have to give up the idea of control and certainty and
Mm-hmm.
drop into, the fascinating thing is, drop into uncertainty. And the synonym for uncertainty is freedom and possibility. So that transition from having like a plateau that says who I am is just this body and I'll try to control this life of 100 years, to dropping into uncertainty, that can be hard at times because we're taught to be certain, certain, certain. But when you drop into uncertainty and not just tolerate it, but actually thrive with it, then freedom and possibility arise. And this is where it's been so exciting to have a whole community of people doing the Wheel of Awareness,
Mm-hmm.
accessing that hub, which
Right.
is just a metaphor, and then collectively working together from the we identity. And
Mm-hmm.
as when you're in a community where people actually from the inside out come with a we identity, the kinds of things that emerge in convening and having conversations are absolutely mind-blowing
Right.
because
I
the
agree.
possibilities are just fabulous.
So we have to wrap up in like a minute or two, but there's something that was raised that feels really salient. I don't think we have time to get deep into it, but Michelle asked, when talking about intersectionality, how can the neurodiverse communities who are not limited to individuals with mental health challenges, trauma on the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, hard of hearing, low vision, dyslexia, and many more, um, who are usually neglected in these conversations may intersect with Black people and or LGBTQIA. So there's a question here that's very much about what are specific ways to respect and acknowledge these communities. Um, you know, my sense is that what we're talking about is about that. It's about relationality. That the premise of Project Inside Out is fundamentally about attunement, and it's about recognizing that each and every single human being is a stakeholder in the planet. I don't, no matter who you are and where you are a vital and equal stakeholder. And that this work is about evolving our capacities to show up in that way in the spirit of partnering and guiding. Um,
Yeah, I mean, everyone is invited in this journey, everyone. And people come with different ways of processing from energy symbols we call information. And there are many, many different kinds of minds and ways of being in the world. The exciting thing is that, with the concept of integration, we want to not just tolerate differences, but actually encourage differences and thrive with differences, take rejoicing in differences. And there's differences in so many ways that we are. So, my response to this really powerful question is, integration, the differentiation of parts of a whole system of our human family and our living being family, is so important to honor, and then establishing linkages so that we realize we're all in this together. And so there's lots of ways of doing that. And sometimes some of the greatest wisdom comes from people that aren't just in the typical way of neural development, but have unique ways of seeing things, and I think Greta Thunberg is a good example of that. I mean, she herself says she has high functioning autism, and she is seeing clearly what needs to be done, and she's guiding the world. And so I think she's a great example of really, we're all in this together. And so let's get together to work.
right. Thank you. So I believe that we are at time. We could easily go on for hours. But thank you. This has been absolutely brilliant, and really appreciate the conversation with you and with everyone. And there's a lot of active response that's been happening in the chat as you've been speaking, Dan, and as we've been speaking. So
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And Renee, thank you for inviting me to join this very important and exciting Project Inside Out. And I wish you all the best on it. And I look forward to having all of our collaborations, resonate with each other as we attune to one another.
thank you. And thank you as well to Sarah for joining us in the session.